Hey there, this is Michelle at East Avenue Art, and today I'm going to show you how I painted these beginner-friendly watercolor popsicles that I turned into birthday cards. To start, I drew and cut out a popsicle shape on cardstock paper because I knew I wanted this sort of like repeating pattern, and I'm not really great at reproducing the same shape and size over and over again. So this was a really good approach for me to follow, and it prevented me from having to erase all over my watercolor paper, which here I'm using Arches 100% cold pressed paper. And the more you erase, because it is 100% cotton paper, it just doesn't really love the erasing, and rubbing on that cotton paper can sometimes really damage it. So once I finished that, I went ahead and got my palette ready. This is my Mungyo 48 pan set of watercolors. And I started just by dropping in some clean water, and I'm going around the whole interior of my popsicle. I'm avoiding the stick part because obviously that's going to be a different color. And I was really thoughtful about my color palette. I decided I really wanted to do complementary colors that sit opposite the color wheel. So I did pink and green. I also did some blue and oranges. And I just used the same colors in different patterns. Um, and one thing I'll mention is because these colors are complementary colors, if you mix them together, you will actually get brown. And we don't want brown popsicles. That doesn't sound very appealing. So I was really careful about just like sort of dropping in the color and letting it sort of meet in the middle, but not doing too much mixing. So you can see I'm just very careful about dropping in the color and then just letting them sort of meet in the middle without doing too much combining of the colors, if that makes sense. Like if I had sort of used my brush to bring them together, I would have ended up with a little bit of a brown actually where they met. And so this time around, I decided, oh, I'm going to add a little bit more pink just to kind of brighten up that pink color. And so this one I'm going with blue and orange, and it's the same process. If you look at the color wheel, blue and orange sit opposite each other. And so, I'd really end up with a brown if I didn't sort of just drop in the color like you see me here without spending too much time um, like sort of scribbling them together. I'm just being very, very careful how I dot in that color. And then each time I'm cleaning off my brush, after I was working with that orange, I cleaned off my brush before I dabbed in some blue again. So just being really careful with how I'm working through, um, combining the colors and letting them meet in the middle. And also, I think this is a good practice for beginner watercolorists because it allows you to see how wet into wet works. And it allows you to see how much water you should have on the paper versus how much paint you should have on the brush. So, this is kind of just like a fun little activity that will allow you to learn a little bit about watercolor and how just sort of the amount of water to paint ratio works for you and what happens on the page. And it's really sort of low stakes because it's just some popsicles. You can't mess them up too much. And so for this one, I decided to combine the pink and blue for a little something different. And yes, so here I'm showing if I was gonna mix the pink and green. Now, if I actually tried to just like, instead of dropping in the colors, like I'm here, you can see I'm really combining them and scribbling them. You can see where they meet, it creates a little bit of a brown. In the same way with the blue and orange. See, when I like scribble them together, it doesn't really create a very satisfying color. But it's also really helpful for you to know this, I think, because sometimes you do want to get sort of a darker shade of a color and using the complementary color. So in the case of like red or pink, it would be a green. If you want a little bit of a shadow for a red color, adding in some green can help you to do that a little bit more naturally. So that's actually kind of a helpful trip. But in this case, I didn't really want a shadow color. I just wanted my pinks and greens to meet in the middle without them creating too much of a shadow. And I'm sorry that this part is off. It's off screen, but I was mixing green and orange, so I thought that was a little bit fun. So just as I kind of keep repeating the process of wetting the popsicle and then dropping in the color that I'm using, I wanted to point out a couple more things. So you can see that the top row is dry and the paint looks a little bit duller than it did when it was wet. And you can see by contrast what the paint looks like when it's wet on the popsicle that I'm working on. And I think that's something to keep in mind as a painter, that especially with watercolors, the dried paint looks pretty different oftentimes than it does when it's wet. And so if you want the colors to be more vibrant, you need to add layers. I'm not using layers in this painting. It's really just going to be a wet into wet, and then I'm going to let it dry, and that's the color. Now, I knew what the colors were going to look like because I had done a little bit of on just sort of scrap paper that I had sitting around. I had a little bit of scrap paper and I just sort of set up what the colors were going to look like so I could see them dry. I recommend doing that just on a scrap sheet of watercolor, just having sort of your color palette. Put a little bit of squiggle of all of the colors that you want to use so you know what it's going to look like when it dries, and you're going to see how the colors sort of work together. And so as I kept working on the popsicles, I mixed up some of the color combinations just for a little bit of fun. And yeah, I just kind of kept repeating this process. And I really can't say enough, like, you can see how the paint and the water interact and how much paint and water you should have down and on versus what's on the brush. I like to recommend that when you fill an area that you don't want to have puddles of water, you want to have a little bit of a sheen. And it's really hard to show on video what that sheen looks like. But a lot of times I will pick up my painting, especially when I was starting. So I'd put down a little bit of water and then I'd pick it up, my painting up, to see like the reflection and to make sure there weren't any pools of water, because you don't want that. You want to sop that up a little bit. And but I would pick it up and I would kind of see, oh, is it shiny, is it not pooling? And that's how I knew I had enough water while I was still learning. Now at this point I can just put the water down and I have a good feel for it, but it's been, several years of practice. So I wish I could show better. I'm filming with my camera still. I wish I could show you what it looks like to get that sheen or that shine on the page when you have just enough water and no puddles. But alas, I'm not able to do that. But test it out yourself if you're still learning, and I think you'll kind of really um, learn a lot from doing that. Just pick up your page. It doesn't have to stay on the desk. So on this last row, I'm still experimenting with the paint combos and colors and location on the popsicle, but I'm also adding a little bit more thicker consistency of paint to my brush. So there's less water to paint ratio on my actual brush, and you might have seen that when I put down the green paint at the top of this popsicle, that there's even kind of a little bit of a harsher line than some of the other paintings. And you'll see how that dries a little bit more vibrantly than the popsicles that I had sort of a more watery consistency, a more what they call tea-like consistency of paint to watercolor. And there you see how I've really loaded up my brush with a lot of paint there, that pink paint. It's getting a little unwieldy, right? You see how much that pink wants to run everywhere. And you can, again, see I've loaded up a lot of peach on my brush, or orange or peach, whatever you want to call that. Um, and so, yeah, it's a little bit more of a stronger colors that I'm using on this last line, just to kind of see the difference between um, the consistencies of paint that I'm using. So at this point, I've finished painting my popsicles and I've let them dry completely. And this piece is important. So I demonstrated with the popsicles themselves the wet into wet process, where you wet the whole area and you drop in color. And you can see sort of the fun variation that you get with sort of the variety of consistency of paint I used. You can really see how those two colors on each one of those popsicles combined in sort of a playful way. However, I'm now moved on to doing the popsicle sticks, these little brown popsicle sticks, and I do not want the brown to mix into the color so of the popsicles, right? So I have to wait for that to have completely dried. And you can see I can go right up to the dry paint as long as I don't sort of reactivate that paint by getting it wet. Um, it's not going to combine with the popsicle color. And so that's one of the main key things to take away when you're first learning to watercolor, is like understanding the wetness effect. And then if you don't want colors to blend, you've got to wait for things to dry. And sometimes it's tough to tell when something is fully dried. It can seem like it's dry, it can look dry, but if it's still a little bit damp, you're going to get a really weird combination that you didn't ask for. So some people recommend using a drying tool, like a heat tool. If I'm really in a hurry, I will use just a hair dryer. Some places do sell art drying tools, but honestly, I think if you've got a hair dryer, it works completely just as well. And another way you can tell if you're not sure if something is fully wet, if you put the back of your hand on it, you can determine if there's like a little bit of moisture. That part of your hand is a little bit more sensitive to moisture, and you can tell if it's like still a little damp that way. But if you're ever not sure, either just wait or take a blow dryer to it. And it's kind of fun because I have done the blow dryer effect, and you can see the dampness actually come out the bottom of it. So at this point, I decided to cut up my cards into card shapes. I picked 5x7, and I just cut up the cards, in a random way, because I just wanted this to be more of a pattern card. And from here, I'm going to write a couple of phrases onto them. So I'm going to write happy birthday, and I think birthday wishes. So I'm trying to decide where to put that. I like doing a combination of cursive and printing. I think that looks really cool. And then I wanted to sort of write birthday across the cards, but then I wasn't super happy with how I arranged it on the page. So you can see I was actually able to erase, and it didn't mess with the paint at all. But I also should mention that I took a fine liner and I outlined in a messy sort of way around each one of the popsicles, and I did not show that, unfortunately. So I've added some fine liner over my pencil, and now I'm getting rid of my pencil guide, and you can see I'm basically finished that card. I think there's a little bit of like pencil that I still need to erase. And the watercolor really reacts fine to you erasing on top of it. It acts fine for you writing on top of it. I really recommend using Pigma Micron pens. Those are great pens that are waterproof, so those are really good ones to use. But yeah, you can see I'm having a little bit of trouble again with my spacing. If I was super serious about this, I would have measured it out, but this is just kind of a little bit of a light-hearted card. So I tested out a couple things. Does it work to put birthday wishes like the way I did the happy birthday? I didn't think so, so I decided I was just going to do cursive birthday wishes. For both things, and I'm just playing around with the handwriting and the spacing. You'd see I did a little like back of the paper napkin with my measuring the spacing with my finger there. And so I'm going to go over my pencil with just sort of this card, pen, I should say, and then the way that I achieve sort of a faux calligraphy look is all of my downstrokes I thicken, and then I sort of color them in, and that's how you get like a calligraphy vibe. And what I mean by downstrokes is anytime when you're writing in cursive, the pen moves towards you, that's viewed as a downstroke. And in calligraphy, you would be applying more pressure to the pen to achieve that look. And oh, here we go. So I can tape this to or glue it to a 5x7 card, and I've got a really easy birthday card that is homemade. So here is a vibrant, easy, simple watercolor card. I hope you enjoyed this and that you learned something. For more, please like and subscribe. Thanks.